All right, let's continue. I think we stopped at topics regarding value objects and entities. So, all right, let's talk about the differences between the value object and an entity. Because currently in our batch, we have, in our order line, we have a class that is identified uniquely by the order ID, the SKU, and the quantity. And if we change one of these values, we now have a new line. And that's a value object, any object that's identified only by its data. It doesn't have a long-lived identity. Now, a batch, on the other hand, has the long-lived identity. So, just to repeat it, an object is identified only by its data. If we change the data, it becomes a different object. And as I said, an example is the order line. And if we would have an order line consisting of these values, if any of these values change, it's no longer the same order line. It has no identity beyond its values. Now, the entity is an object that is identified by the reference. And even if the SKU or the quantity changes, we still refer it as a batch 001. And that makes that an entity. It has an identity that persists even as its data evolves. I'm also scribing this down for future reference. One thing we can do to make classes explicitly defined as entities is to implement equality operators. So I misclicked something. Let's close this. Return false. So the instance of the other thing that we are comparing against isn't a batch, we are returning a false. Otherwise, let's compare it on reference, and that's it. I could also create a hash here. Just a quick reference on the magic method, underscore equal. So it's a magic method in Python that lets us define what it means for two objects in your class to be equal. And we use the double equality operator. So without this method, Python would check if two objects are the same object in the memory, not if their content is the same. So something like this would be false. Even though the values here are the same, Python would say false here because it doesn't know how to compare four objects. So it has a fallback of comparing memory addresses. But with our own equality rules that we have defined here, we can actually compare different batches. And it's called a magic method because it's a special method in Python with double underscores like hash or init. Yeah, like here. They're called implicitly by Python in certain situations, but you can override them to control that behavior. Now, the hash method is yet another magic method. It defines how to compute a hash value for an object. And the hash value is used when we add the object to a set or use it as a key in a dictionary. So what are we trying to do normally in domain-driven design? We try to attach behavior to the right object. For example, we have allocate here based on an order line. It makes sense because allocating an order line to a batch sounds like a thing a batch would do. But sometimes a piece of logic doesn't clearly belong to either object or an entity. So, for example, let's say we have a certain situation. We have a customer, and a customer places an order using the order line class. And we have a list of batches in our warehouse. And we want to find a suitable batch and allocate the order line to it. So let me just so we have Nike 500, for example, which is our SKU, and we have 5. So someone orders this, someone places an order, and we have a list of batches in our warehouse. I'll represent them as boxes here. So we want to find a suitable batch and allocate this order to one of them. But we have a catch, so we are not changing the order line itself. It's still Nike's 500, and we still want to order 5 of them. And we are not changing the nature of any individual batch. So we are working across multiple batches, and we want to choose the best one. So where do we put this logic? Because it doesn't really belong inside either a batch or order line. So we need basically something called a domain service, which is basically a function or a class that contains domain logic, and it doesn't naturally live in any entity or value object. And it helps our entities simple and focused. All right, so let's put it here. Or maybe below. How is it not defined? All right, we need to, from typing, we need to import the list. So this is our method. I'll also handle the batch not defined issue soon. I just want to say, why didn't we put this in the batch class? So we could have put it in the batch class, but now if we move this inside here, the batch would know about other batches, and that's not optimal because it will break encapsulation and feel unnatural. Regarding this method that we added, in plain English, this function will find the first batch that can fulfill the order line. It will allocate the order to that batch, and it will return the batch reference here. Okay, let's continue our magic mission with the magic methods. So in order to use sorted on our list of batches, and it's pretty nice. It's a simple method. It's idiomatic Python. But in order to make it work, we need to implement the comparison method. Oh no, I misclicked again. I misclicked again. All right, we also have some tests that we have written here. Test prefers current stock batches to shipments. This test says if we have a batch that's already in stock and one that's arriving tomorrow, we should allocate from the in-stock one. Test prefers earlier batches. This test checks if all the shoots are shipping batches. Pick the one arriving soonest. And test returns allocated batch reference. This one checks that the correct batch reference is returned when we allocate. And that's it. Maybe we can just do a review on certain concepts, like for example, domain modeling, which is the part of the code that it's closest to business. It's most likely to change, and it's the place where you deliver the most value to the business. And we need to create it so it's easy to understand and modify. And also we need to know the difference between entities and value objects. And as we said already, a value object is defined by its attributes and is best implemented as an immutable type. But comparing to that, we have an entity that has attributes that might change over time. But it still will reference the same entity, and it will reference the same entity because it needs to uniquely identify an entity, which is usually some sort of an ID or reference field. And sometimes we need to also realize that not everything needs to be an object. We can create methods and even domain services, which are basically functions or classes that contain domain logic, and they don't live in any entity or value object, and they help our entities keep simple and focused. And I think that's it for domain design chapters, and the next one we'll do something else. Thank you so much. Bye bye.